This is the repair of a Cuisinart attachment, the chopper grinder attachment that goes to the CSB-77 smart stick. So these are rather expensive. Once they stop working, in my application, the blade is not spinning. So to replace it, they're about $40, which is too high of a cost compared to the total cost of the actual brand new unit. So we're going to go ahead and take this thing apart and see what we've got. So if you look very carefully, you're going to see three round little circles on this side, and you're going to drill those little circles out. They're about a 1/4 inch diameter, and directly below those things, about a 1/2 inch below the surface, 3/4 inch, are 3 Phillips screws, and that's what you need to do in order to remove or to split this attachment apart. So again, look at those 3 little attachments. They're little indentations from probably from manufacturer. Look like they're welded plugs, if you will. So there we've gone ahead. We've drilled it out. We've removed. You can see the hole. You can actually, if you can, you're lucky. You can actually see deep down inside. You'll see the 3 Phillips screws. So they're down there. They're not very, the screws are not very big, so you don't need a really big screwdriver. Just get it in there, remove those 3 screws, and that'll get you access. Otherwise, you're going to break this thing. So this is a bit of a trial and error for me. I made a few mistakes, and the idea, I could not find any videos on how to take this thing apart, how to possibly repair it. Now, the cool thing is you don't really need this particular repair that I'm doing. You don't need parts. You can improvise a washer and make it as a spacer and decrease the space. And so, at any rate, here we are. Let's go take a look at this. You saw that twice now. Took it apart. Had to re-drill that one hole a little bit more. It wasn't deep enough. Comes apart. Now be very careful when you take this thing apart, because there are some little fiber washers that go on top of those gears. So you want to be very careful when you take it apart. Watch for those, set them aside. They are kind of affixed with a little bit of grease, so they're not going to just spin out and fly out everywhere. So I did make a few mistakes, and I'm going to try to give you a heads up so you don't have similar mistakes. So my mistake is going to be in the next step. The white gear that's on the primary shaft, we're not sure how it's attached. So it's actually just affixed with just pressure. That shaft that white gear is affixed to is held in place with the shaft is serrated, and the gear just sort of slips onto it. Yeah, we're just taking a look at this thing. Okay, so again, the next step here is to go ahead and I'm sort of analyzing it, seeing where parts are going, so that I can have a good idea of how to put the thing back together. Maybe this light will be a little bit better for you. Taking that first gear just slides right off. Pretty sweet. That's easy enough. Again, watch those there's 2 little nylon washers. Okay, so this gear is the thing that I had a little bit of trouble with. I thought it was on there with a lot of pressure. My first thought was the blade is not spinning because the gear is stripped. However, the gear has pretty good solid contact with this shaft, so that's not the problem. The real problem is that there's too much space. Okay, so here's the problem. So I'm using these pliers to try to remove that gear, and it's too aggressive of a tool. What I ended up doing, there's a little fiber washer and a little locking ring that I ended up bending. I don't want you to do that. So I think you can get on one side of this locking ring and just pop it off with a screwdriver, and then take the gear off, and then you're sort of protected. Or if you can't, just sort of very carefully pry this gear off, being aware that there's a washer there and there's also this little lock ring. I had to spend a fair bit of time having to recustomize it, the lock ring, if you will, to make it fit. So I don't want you to do that. Just be a little bit more careful. Again, this is my first time taking one of these things apart. Yeah, so the symptoms are the smart stick turns on, powers up, pretty good. However, the blade isn't spinning. And so what I'm doing here, I'm sort of experimenting. I'm putting it all back together, and I notice that the blade, if I push onto the shaft and push it towards the motor, I get good solid contact. And so it's not that that white gear, here I'm actually taking a screwdriver and I'm confirming it. I'm putting a fair bit of pressure on it, and that gear spins very, very rigorously, very, very freely. So what the determinant is that perhaps those little fiber washers that they've included, that over a certain period of time of using the machine, they wear out, and the space between the shaft where it connects into the motor decreases. And so we're going to put in a spacer, and I just custom made one. Ideally, it'd be nice if you can get one made out of plastic or Teflon, but it's got to be the right diameter that has to fit in that hole and also has to fit over the shaft. We're going to get into that here in a little bit, and you'll see what I'm talking about. So we're going to take this lock ring off. I end up here just sort of straightening up that lock ring, sort of paying for my impatience and not really analyzing it. So I'm just getting this lock ring that I distorted with that pliers. We don't want you to do that, so just be aware of it. I'm having to shape it, which is a lot of extra effort, and it's fairly thin, so probably easy to break also, so be careful. Again, that gear really just slips on with almost with finger pressure. It does have some teeth on the shaft that that gear slides onto and makes a pretty decent connection. So this thing just pulls out going towards the motor, and what you're going to see is I ended up taking a standard metal washer about a 1/16 of an inch thick, if you will, and you have to get the diameter and also the hole size correct, so that what we're doing is we're creating a spacer, and we're pushing the shaft closer to the motor so that it makes physical contact with the spinning part of the motor. Right now, and I'm assuming that maybe these washers, that because they're not metal, they're actually plastic or some material, that they've worn down over use, and they no longer make good contact. So there you're seeing me slipping on my new washer. I'm going to show you a little drawing. So this is sort of a cross section, if you will. So study it and see where that washer is. So this other lock ring on that shaft, you don't have to remove it. You only have to remove the one lock ring towards the blade side. The second lock ring, not necessary to remove. It stays on there. Don't take it off. Yeah, it was a little bit of experimenting. I did have to grind a washer down so that it would fit, and then I had to drill out the hole in the washer. And again, I think my dimension was about a 1/16 of an inch. Now, I don't see any parts for this attachment. All I could find were you just have to buy the attachment. You can get some used on eBay. They're about $40. So I went ahead, and because I broke one of those fiber washers, I took a blender and stripped one of those Teflon type of washers off of it and added it to my unit where I broke one when I took that gear off. So ideally, you don't want to do that. Again, it's not a terribly difficult fix. I think the hardest thing is to know that there's those how to drill out those 3 holes so you can get access to the Phillips, and that was a very beneficial, if you will. Sorry about some of the jumping around with the light. Yeah, here I'm putting it back together, and I'm having to very carefully push that locking ring back on. It's a little bit tricky because I did distort it. Fortunately, it's thin enough you can kind of open it up so that it slides on the shaft better. I'm sort of checking the play. Okay, you don't hear it on the motor, but the motor's making, at this point, good contact. So I can put my finger, prior to me putting that spacer in, if I went ahead and I put my fingers on the gear, well, the gear would stop spinning. With the washer, the spacer, if you will, then it wouldn't stop spinning. It had good physical contact. So there again, I'm sort of going through the process of fixing that washer back on that shaft. Yeah, it's worth the repair. It's worth the time and the effort. I mean, having a video is going to be extremely helpful. Okay, so here we're going to be putting it back together. So we've confirmed I've got good physical contact with the motor spinning that shaft. I'm putting this gear back on. Now when you put the cover on, there is a little indentation for that second gear, and so just pay attention to where it goes. Now also it comes with two little, this is where you when you were careful with those two little small little washers, those go on top of the shaft on that second gear. And so again, it matches up with that cover, if you will, and then just line up the 3 holes, screw it down. Now you're going to have to fill these holes up so that it doesn't get water going down into it. Not that it would cause a lot of trouble, but it'd be a whole lot easier to keep clean. So I recommend that you either put some tape on it or fill up those holes with a little bit of silicone so that you make a silicone plug. If you found that this video is going to be useful for you, there's a good working contact. So all is good. Remember to subscribe and like. Thank you very much.